You gotta get swifty. You gotta get swifty in here. It's time to get swifty. Uh-oh.
Welcome back. This is Chicken Philosophy, Nag Hammadi, Part 3, in which I will continue reading the Nag Hammadi Scriptures, picking up right where Pymander left off last time. We're still reading the introduction. My goal for today, I'm determined to finish the introduction so that next time in Nag Hammadi Part 4, BT, who you remember from Part 1, can start reading the Nag Hammadi Scriptures instead of just the introduction. But the introduction is important. It's good to be introduced. You get a lot of details that we wouldn't have known otherwise. So if you would like to start at the beginning of the Nag Hammadi series, or if you're a little bit in my future, if you would like to skip the introduction and get right to the scriptures, then you can, so I'm going to point to the corner of the screen, and that'll take you to the playlist. Part 1 is the beginning. Part 4 is where the scriptures begin. So here's the playlist. Bye! Okay, now that they're gone, today's incense is rose, morning star rose. It's a Japanese temple-y kind of meditative. I mean, all incense, well, generally incense is meditative, I'd say. Even like frankincense and myrrh from one of those big things that the altar boys love around is kind of meditative in its own way. But anyway, yeah, so this is very nice, though. Very nice. Smell that? Just say yes. You can pretend. No, I'm just kidding. I wouldn't boss you around like that. And just to get a little bit of extra rose happening, so we got kind of a theme, a rosy theme. Yeah. I'll just put a drop of that on my wrist. Not too much. And yeah, I don't want to get it on the book. So, all right, we got lots of rose energy happening, and then of course we've got my coffee, cream. It's like alchemy right before your eyes. Anyway, right. Today's music is brought to you, as often is, by Café de Anatolia. Usually, the Café de Anatolia is on the Meccan Revelations recitals, but today it's on the Nag Hammadi. Okay, have I forgotten anything? Should I just get to the reading? I should just get to the reading, shouldn't I? Very nice aesthetic experience here with the rose and the coffee. All right. Picking up right where we left off last time. When an international group of scholars first read and published the Gospel of Thomas in 1959, the primary question in their minds, not surprisingly, was this: what can the Gospel of Thomas tell us about, quote, Gnosticism, end quote? That is, about, quote, heresy, end quote. Since Irenaeus and others had denounced such gospels, they assumed that Thomas must not only be a false, quote, Gnostic, end quote, gospel, but that also, being a, quote, false gospel, end quote, it must have been written later than the, quote, real, end quote, gospels. I appreciate the whoever wrote the introduction's use of quotes. Anyway, and since most people agree that Mark's gospel was written earliest, some 40 years after Jesus' death, around the year 70, Matthew and Luke about 10 years later, and John about 90 to 100. I assume you mean Common Era and not years later. It's not really clear. Anyway, they assumed that Thomas must be later than any of these, and so guessed that it dated to about 140 Common Era. Why not? Further, since they assumed that this gospel was, quote, heretical, end quote, they knew what to expect in terms of content. After all, church fathers like Irenaeus basically had defined, or some would say invented, heresy. Irenaeus explains that heretics are, quote, Gnostics, end quote, by which he means dualists who believe that the world was created by an evil power, and so they have a dismally negative view of the world and the God who created it. Furthermore, following Irenaeus' lead, it's funny how his name's sort of similar to Erroneous. Many of these scholars also assumed that heretics are, quote, nihilistic, end quote, and that the works they revered would be full of philosophical speculation and bizarre mythology. When the first editors of Thomas's Gospel found in it virtually no evidence for dualism, nihilism, philosophical speculation, or weird mythology, most assumed that this just goes to show how devious heretics are. They do not say what they really mean. Many scholars decided that even if they could not find these elements in Thomas explicitly, they must be there implicitly. Consequently, some decided just to read them into their understanding of the Gospel of Thomas. Most of the first publications did this. Some still do even now. When the discovery became available to scholars throughout the world, many of us shared the excitement of investigating these nearly unknown texts. Hearing about the discovery astonished everyone who heard it. This certainly was not what we had expected to find in graduate school, nor in fact what we had hoped to find. Most of us who set out to find out about Jesus and the early history of Christianity imagined that we could find in 1st and 2nd century sources a kind of, quote, golden age, end quote, of Christianity, a simpler, purer Christian teaching that existed when Jesus wandered with his disciples around the hills of Galilee. What Professor Christer Stendahl, then Dean of Harvard Divinity School, ironically called, quote, play Bible land, end quote. And since we assumed that there must have been only one original pure form of Christianity back at its beginning, we never imagined that we would be asking the question that this discovery now raises for us. What different Christian groups, and thus what kinds of early Christianity, were there at the beginning of the movement? Yet, by the time many of us arrived in graduate school, certain scholars already had begun to embark upon a second stage of research. Examining the Gospel of Thomas, scholars first noticed that it is not a narrative like the New Testament Gospels. Instead, it consists simply of a list of sayings attributed to Jesus. Scholars like Helmut Koister, James M. Robinson, and John Dominic Crossan observed that many sayings in Thomas are strikingly similar to sayings long familiar from the New Testament Gospels attributed to Matthew and Luke. This isn't the sort of thing that I like in an introduction. This is actually kind of the reason I skip introductions. Don't tell me what other people thought of it after they read it. It's like going to a movie, going to Dune, and hearing from the people who just walked out, and they were like, yeah, when I sat down, I was expecting, this and that. But then when the worm came, and I was like, oh my God, and the soundtrack was all crazy, and then you just wait till you see it. It's like, fuck off, I would, well, anyway, sorry. It's of historical interest what people thought, I guess, who went to Harvard when they read the thing that we're going to read later, so that we know what they... never mind. It's just... I'm calm, I'm easy, nice and easy. Gotta read the introduction. I love introductions, don't you? Oh, they're so good. Yes. All right. Tell me more. For example, such well-known parables about the kingdom of God and the parable of the mustard seed and the parable of the sower and such sayings as, quote, blessed are the poor, for yours is the kingdom of yours is heaven's kingdom, end quote. The research of this generation of scholars opened up new questions. Could the Gospel of Thomas, for example, possibly be not a late, quote, Gnostic, end quote, gospel, as many of us first assumed, but on the contrary, an early collection of Jesus' teachings? Perhaps even one that Matthew and Luke used to compose their own Gospels, or whoever was writing in the name of Matthew and Luke, or whoever wrote the ones that were later assigned to Matthew and Luke. Yeah. It's like Nagarjuna, it's like, which Nagarjuna are we talking about? You know what I'm saying? It was like Solomon. Oh, was he around in the 1400s? Anyway, could it be the so-called Q source? Okay, YouTube algorithm, AI machine. I'm reading the introduction of a book that this has nothing to do with any of that other paranoid craziness. All right. Anyway, a hypothetical first century list of Jesus' sayings. Is it possible that Gospel of Thomas might tell us a great deal not about heresy, but about Jesus and his teachings? Could this be an early source, maybe even our earliest source of Jesus' teachings, collected in an unedited, unvarnished form? Questions like these inspired a movement among a group of scholars looking for the, quote, real, historical, end quote, Jesus, and what Jesus actually taught. Professor Helmut Koester came to conclude that the Gospel of Thomas perhaps could be dated as early as mid-first century, about 20 years after Jesus' death, which would make it the earliest Gospel we know, and certainly one of the most important. John Dominic Crossan, and others have written books that follow this view, and many people are still engaged in this research. At present, however, many do not share the view that the Gospel of Thomas is a kind of rough query of early Jesus sayings strung together with minimal editorial point of view. Even though our evidence cannot tell us for sure what came from, quote, the historical Jesus, end quote, it can tell us a great deal, more than we ever knew before, about the early Christian movement, how it emerged, and the astonishing variety of forms it took. Recognizing this, many scholars today throughout the world have accepted the challenge articulated by our colleagues Michael A. Williams in his book Rethinking, quote, Gnosticism, end quote, an argument for dismantling a dubious category, and Karen L. King in What is Gnosticism? Instead of regarding the many texts found at Nag Hammadi as a corporate collection, scholars today more often analyze each one separately or in relationship with contemporaneous Jewish, Christian, and pagan sources. Instead of assuming that all these texts deviate from what is, quote, normal, mainstream, and, quote, early Christianity, we are finding that they have opened up to us a far wider range of what we now understand to be early Christian sources. Instead of discriminating simply between what we used to call, quote, orthodox, and quote, Gnostic, and, quote, parentheses, or, quote, proto-orthodox, and quote, proto-Gnostic, and, quote, end parentheses. No, never mind about the end parentheses. We're still in them parentheses, which amounts to the same thing. End parentheses. Many scholars working on the Coptic texts are now investigating the new evidence along with the old to ask different questions. Many of us are discussing questions like whether it is misleading to classify these texts as, quote, Gnostic, end quotes. Given how varied they are, we realize that it is more accurate to look at them simply as a wide range of early Christian traditions that are unfamiliar to us because the bishops intended to downplay viewpoints that diverged from their own. Professor Karen King has suggested that we should ask what evidence these many texts offer for various kinds of, quote, early Christianities, end quote. You can't spell early Christianities without T's. Simultaneously, scholars of Judaism are investigating a wide range. Judaism? I've heard all three. That's why I'm stopping to ask. I'm not like, oh, I've never seen this word before. People say Judaism, but it's spelled Judaism. So that's why. Never mind. Are investigating a wide range of, quote, early Judaisms, end quote. Finally, such investigation raises the question of what our familiar terminology means and what it obscures. What do we mean when we speak of what is, quote, orthodox, end quote, and what is, quote, heretical, end quote? What characteristics differentiate and define what we mean when we speak of, quote, Judaism, end quote, or, quote, Christianity, end quote? In many ways, investigation of the Nag Hammadi texts is just the beginning. This volume invites readers to participate in exploring the early Christian movement with far more evidence of its amazing range than we had known before. And that's the end of the section, but not the end of the introduction. This last part of the introduction is entitled Reading the Nag Hammadi Scriptures, which is what we'll be doing next time in part 4 of Nag Hammadi. Reading the Nag Hammadi Scriptures. What a concept. Been looking forward to that. All right, anyway, back to it. In this volume, the texts of the Nag Hammadi Library, the Berlin Gnostic Codex, and Codex Tzachos are presented in an edition that is intended to build upon the international scholarship that has been directed toward the texts in these codices since they were discovered and made available for research and study. In particular, the work of the Coptic Gnostic Library Project of the Institute for Antiquity and Christianity of Claremont Graduate University, the Berliner Arbeitskreis für Koptisch-Gnostische Schriften at the Theological Faculty of Humboldt University, and the French-Canadian team at the Institut des Études Anciennes, or something to that effect, and the Faculté de Théologie et des Sciences, I don't speak French, religieuses of the Université Laval in Quebec. J'ai étudié le français pour 3 ans dans le lycée, mais je don't remember any of it. You know what I'm saying? has been consulted in order to take advantage of the interpretations and insights of the scholars involved in these research projects. The published work of these projects includes the volumes of the Gnostic Gospel, the Coptic Gnostic Library, and the Nag Hammadi Library in English, parentheses edited by James M. Robinson, end parentheses, Nag Hammadi Deutsch, parentheses edited by Hans Martin Schenke, Hans Gebhard Bethge, and Ursula Ulrich Kaiser, end parentheses, and the Bibliothèque Copte de Nag Hammadi et Écrit Gnostique, parentheses, edited by Jean-Pierre Mahe and Paul Hubert Poyer, end parentheses, all of which we have used in our translations of the texts. Individuals from these three research teams have also functioned as members of the advisory board for this volume in order that the contributions of each of the teams might gain a fair hearing. And we all have met together several times at Université Laval to discuss the translations prepared for the present volume. The result has been a collegial effort to produce a volume fully informed by the latest research on the Nag Hammadi Library, the Berlin Gnostic Codex, and the Codex Tchakos. The English translations included in the Nag Hammadi Scriptures thus represent a new generation.
It's a new generation. It's divine inspiration. It's a calm meditation of a tranquilized nation. It's a hallucination.
Thank you, Danny Elfman and the Mystic Knights of the Oingo Boingo. A new generation of translations after the initial translations that appeared in the first editions of these texts. We have made a conscientious attempt to produce English translations that adhere closely to the meaning of the Coptic texts, parentheses, and as noted in a few instances, also some Greek texts, end quote, while being as readable and felicitous as possible. The present English versions of the texts are translations, not lexical equivalencies, and as a result, they communicate the meaning of the texts in modern English rather than reproducing every grammatical feature of the Coptic text. Yeah, that would get annoying. Better to just what would English say that is the same as that, rather than whatever the exact words. What is it that it is? Qu'est-ce que c'est? What is it? Anyway, we have given special attention to issues of gender in our translations. Ooh. And we employ inclusive language where the spirit of the Coptic text recommends it, and where it does not compromise the accuracy of the translations. Yes. Thus, most often the translations use, quote, child of humanity, parentheses, where the gender of the figure referred to is uncertain or general, end quote, or, quote, son of humanity, end quote, parentheses, where the gender of the figure referred to is masculine, as in the case of Jesus. All right. Identifies as male. That's all right. He's welcome to do that. Cishet white man he is. Yeah. Historical Jesus. All right. Cishet Palestinian man. Yeah. Sorry. One assumes. Instead of the more traditional, quote, son of man. What? Did I miss something? No. Right. Okay. End quote. Son of humanity. Oh, okay. So when they say son of humanity in the text, they mean son of man. So this is information that I like to have in an introduction, not Fred read it and he thought, what? But I guess it is kind of interesting. Yeah, they thought it was going to be heresy, but then it was just like, no, this is just early Christianity. Cool. Good for us to know. Kind of going, maybe. I don't know. In some texts, such as the Secret Book of John and the Holy Book of the Great Invisible Spirit, that use exalted terms to describe how the divine transcends all finite categories, including gender categories, the translations read, quote, it, end quote, for, quote, he, end quote, or, quote, him, end quote, in the Coptic, parentheses, and sometimes use, quote, parent, end quote, along with, quote, father, end quote, in the Coptic, end quote, until the texts themselves distinguish between the father and the mother in their presentations. Nonetheless, a certain amount of gender bias has been allowed to remain in the translations as a reflection of the preferences of the translators. The specific contents of the texts and the nature of the Coptic language, which has no neuter gender, but makes use of the masculine to refer to what is indefinite or neutral. You guys understand what they're saying? You see what I did there? Oh, shit. Sorry about that. The expressions, quote, child of humanity, end quote, and, quote, son of humanity, end quote, along with others, are capitalized when they function as titles for a given figure, though such a determination of function remains somewhat arbitrary. In general, we have struggled with matters of capitalization in English, and we have tried to reach a happy balance in the capitalization of personified terms that have both a mythological and a psychological function in the texts. For example, epinoia, quote, insight, end quote. What? Or e.g., whatever. Okay. And parentheses. Usually, terms in the texts, even technical terms, example, aeon, archon, gnosis, hypostatis, and pleroma, are translated as, quote, eternal realm, end quote, quote, ruler, end quote, quote, knowledge, end quote, quote, reality, end quote, and, quote, fullness, end quote, respectively. But sometimes they are retained in transliterated form. Aeon, archon, gnosis, hypostasis, and pleroma. Which one's archon? Oh, ruler, eternal realm. Okay. Aeon is eternal realm. Huh. All right. Just going to power through. You watched this much of the episode. Hopefully you're invested enough to endure the doggy. I've already trimmed out quite a bit of time where I sat here and waited for him to stop barking. And then he stopped, so I kept reading. And then now he's starting again. All right. It is what it is, you know. Nobody ever accused chicken philosophy of being perfect. Okay. Yes, right. In the translations, in order to preserve the particular style of the texts. The Coptic word paterf and related terms, which frequently means, quote, everything, or, quote, the universe, end quote, often takes on a special meaning in the texts translated here. And when the word refers to the entirety of the divine realm above, it is usually translated, quote, the all, with a capital A, and, quote, terms including technical terms, appearing in the titles of texts, are translated as well, so that the present volume refers to the Secret Book of James and the Secret Book of John, parentheses, rather than the Apocryphon of James and the Apocryphon of John. It rhymes. End quote. The revelations of Adam, James, Paul, and Peter, parentheses, rather than the apocalypse of Adam, James, Paul, and Peter, end parentheses. the nature of the rulers, parentheses, rather than the hypostasis of the archons. Okay. I like hypostasis of the archons better. End parentheses. 3 forms of first thought, parentheses, rather than trimorphic protenoia, end parentheses, and so forth. The 5th tractate of Nag Hammadi Codex 6 is entitled Excerpt from Plato's Republic, and the 8th tractate Excerpt from the Perfect Discourse. In some texts, especially the Platonizing Sethian texts, where the language seems to be technical and reflective of Middle Platonic and Neoplatonic philosophy, more of the technical terminology is retained, often simply transliterated and explained in the notes. Standard sigilla are used in the present volume, though we have tried to keep standard sigla to a minimum for the sake of ease of reading. Within the English translation, the following signs are employed. Square brackets indicate a textual lacuna that has been restored. When the restoration entails only a, an, the, or and, such a minor restoration is usually not placed within square brackets. Ordinarily, words are placed either entirely inside or outside square brackets. Exceptions to this policy are made in more fragmentary texts, in which portions of the words may be placed inside square brackets. Angle brackets indicate an emendation of a scribal omission or error. Braces indicate superfluous letters that presumably were added by a scribe. Some such instances are indicated in the translation. Instances of ditography, parentheses, the inadvertent copying of a passage twice, end parentheses, are usually indicated in a note. Ellipsis dots indicate unrestored lacunae, portions of Coptic, parentheses, or Greek, end parentheses, text missing in the manuscripts that cannot be restored with confidence. 3 dots indicate a lacuna of a Coptic line or less, that is, a short break in the flow of thought in the text. 6 dots indicate a lacuna of more than a single Coptic line, that is, a major break in the flow of thought in the text. Ordinarily, the extent of the longer lacuna is indicated in a note accompanying the translation. Occasionally, the number of dots within a proper name indicates the number of letters missing in the name. Within the translations, Coptic manuscript page numbers are provided for the sake of reference. In the case of the Gospel of Thomas, traditional sayings numbers are given, along with numbers for subdivisions of sayings. In the case of the sentences of Sextus, the system of numeration follows the standard edition of this tractate, which was composed in Greek and is known in Latin, Syriac, Armenian, and Georgian versions. As in Nag Hammadi Deutsch, here also only Coptic page numbers are given and not line numbers from the manuscripts. The Nag Hammadi Scriptures is not presented as an edition of Coptic manuscripts, but a publication of texts in English translation, and for this reason, the continuation of the use of references based upon line numbers in Coptic manuscripts seems inappropriate. Thus, in the notes to the translations, the cross-references to text in the Nag Hammadi library, the Berlin Gnostic Codex, the Codex Techakos, are given with the titles of the texts and Coptic page numbers, parentheses, or the other systems of numeration, end parentheses. When a particular text is preserved in more than one copy, parentheses, as is the case in the example with the Secret Book of John, end parentheses. The codex number is also provided. Within the instructions to the tractates, however, the textual references include, in addition to the Coptic page numbers, the manuscript line numbers as well, in case readers wish to refer directly to the Coptic manuscripts and the location of the Coptic lines in the manuscripts. Accompanying the translations in the present volume are several aids to interpretation. In addition to the volume introduction, each text is prefaced with its own introduction, which includes bibliographical suggestions for further reading and study. In the translations, there are subheadings that are not in the texts themselves, but have been provided by the translators as a way of indicating sections of the texts. The subheadings include references to Coptic page and line numbers in order to allow for another way of moving from the English translations to the Coptic manuscripts. Notes explain difficult passages and refer to parallel passages. In some cases, as with the Platonizing Sethian texts, the notes are somewhat more substantial to help in the understanding of texts that may benefit from a fuller presentation. An epilogue quotes schools of thought in the Nag Hammadi Scriptures and, quote, discusses Thomist Christianity, the Sethian and Valentinian schools of Gnostic thought, and Hermetic religion within the context of the questions surrounding the term, quote, Gnostic, end quote, and a table of tractates provides an overview of the contents of the Nag Hammadi Library, the Berlin Gnostic Codex, and the Codex Techakos. A bibliography and an index of proper names conclude the volume. In the Nag Hammadi Scriptures, we present a series of English translations prepared and introduced by scholars with different backgrounds and different points of view. Although we have attempted to achieve a degree of stylistic uniformity throughout the volume, some variety inevitably remains, and several voices can be detected in the introductions and translations. We consider such more introductions. My God, just give us the texts. Fuck. No, I guess it's good to know if there's some pertinent information about one particular scripture. Sorry about the noise pollution, but it's nice for me. Got the fan going and the AC on full. The doggies finally shut up for the moment, so hope it's not too annoying. It's much more comfortable for me at the moment. Bit warm. I think when BT records his the beginning of the actual reciting of the scriptures, do it at night. It's like late autumn, but it's tropical, so when it's like a gray day, when it's cloudy outside, well, first of all, we usually would go out because, but yeah, anyway, I might just get in the habit of recording these at night. Where was I? We're almost done with this episode recital. It is our hope that in reading and studying this diverse collection of religious tractates, readers may join us in a process of seeking and finding, and that for those who explore these texts in all their diversity, new light may be shed on the world of antiquity and modernity. As one text in the Nag Hammadi collection, the Gospel of Thomas, puts it, quote, know what is in front of your face, and what is hidden from you will be disclosed to you. For there is nothing hidden that will not be revealed. Oh, what? Oh, okay. What's happening? Yeah, okay, good. We're done with the introduction. And next up is the prayer of the Apostle Paul, which is kind of like, that doesn't sound very Gnostic to me. That sounds more, unless it's not really Paul, or it's another side of Paul we've never seen before. I guess we'll find out next time. We'll all find out together. And there's a little introduction. I guess the translator of, it's like a page and a half, whatever. Okay, so there's introductions. Of course, it's a translation. Ibn Arabi has all kinds of introductions to sections and stuff like that, and we get to know Michel Chodkiewicz and what have you. Perhaps we'll get to know the various voices in this as well, by name, as we go along. We'll be reading this for a long time. All right, I hope that, my needing to change clothes on occasion, and the dog wasn't too bad today. Not as bad as in that one episode of something. I don't remember what it was, but we did something where the dog was particularly distracting. And let me just one second. All right, no noise pollution. Okay, I hope you enjoyed it, and if you're along for the ride, this is the third of the 3 that you've seen, then awesome. Feel free to click like and subscribe, that kind of thing. And next time, if you're into it, if you're just here for the Nag Hammadi, I respect that choice. It might be a little while because we're going to take a little vacation in a few days. But part 4 will continue at some point, probably before December. But next up on Chicken Philosophy, it's going to be Gwydion reading Martin Luther. Oh, God. Why did we decide to read Martin Luther on Chicken Philosophy? Fuck. And so that's something to look forward to if you're into watching me suffer, or Gwydion, or whoever, by whatever name I call me. I am nameless unto eternity. The saying. And I guess that's it. Hope you enjoyed the music today, and the incense, the rose, and the coffee alchemy, and all that good stuff. Until next time.